All right. Just be glad our meeting's at 6 o'clock. I have one at 11 o'clock that's really bad.
At night?
No, in the morning.
Oh.
Yeah. Everybody knows. All right. So let's start with, we'll call the meeting to order for the Zoning Board of Appeals. Today is Wednesday, September 22nd at 6 p.m. Due to the current COVID pandemic, we are meeting via Zoom. If there's anyone here in the public, we welcome you. Curtis, is there anyone from the public?
No, not that I see.
Okay. Are there any correspondences, requests for comment from other boards, committees, and/or officials?
I just have a procedural note that I wanted to remark on while we're all here.
Yes, sir.
So I wanted to inform us all that Linda Bush has tendered her resignation to the board. She has submitted a letter to the mayor, and her resignation was immediate. And as a result, we put forward Steve's name in an application for promotion to a full member, and that has all taken place over the course of the last month. And as of last night, as far as I know, Steve is now a full member of the Zoning Board of Appeal post. I think he's been approved by City Council, but not yet signed by the mayor, which is the relative formality there. So,
all right. Well, welcome to the full status, Steve.
Thank you. I'm finally out of AAA and into the majors.
Yep. Oh.
Thank you.
All right. Well, and now with that commentary about Linda leaving, she was the vice chairperson for the committee. And so I ask, as the current chairperson, is there anyone who's interested in taking the role of vice chairperson for what it's worth?
I'll try it.
Okay, Lindsay. Thank you for stepping up.
Thank you,
awesome.
Curtis. I'll need help if I ever do it, but
well, as you can see, it's an arduous task.
yeah, I'll stick to the rules and the agenda.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty straightforward. I have found that 2 screens work really well because it allows you to have one for the meeting and one for the agenda or any documentation.
Oh, that's a good idea.
So that works for me. But it's also because, other Zoom meetings and WebEx meetings and stuff like that I do the same. So it works quite well for me.
That's a good idea.
That's just a note of confidence. Do we need to vote on Lindsay's? Okay, so we have a motion. Or I guess, do they have to make a motion?
Anyone can make the motion, anyone can second, and anyone can vote, including Lindsay in all cases.
Okay. Well, and then I will do it this way. Lindsay, I make a motion for you to be vice chairperson of the Zoning Board of Appeals.
And I will second it.
All right. And with that, all in favor with a raise of hands? And it is a unanimous decision.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Lindsay.
Thank you.
Okay. So that takes off one of my corrective items on the on the thing we're going to go over. Any other comments or anything from other boards?
The position for our associate position is currently being advertised for anybody who's interested in filling it. If anybody knows anyone who would be interested in potentially serving on a board of the city of Easthampton, feel free to have them pull an application from the city clerk. You can also get them in touch with me if they have any questions. They're not obliged to talk to me, but if they should so desire.
Okay. Okay, so there's no public here. Meetings from the July 28th, 2021 meeting. Were those on the agenda?
Mm-hmm.
On the attachment, correct?
Yep.
All right. And are there any comments, discussion, anything concerning the minutes? We need to approve the minutes.
I make a motion to approve the minutes from July 28th.
Okay.
Good.
All right. Kenny, Anthony's going to second those. So all in favor? All right. Unanimous. Moving right through. All right. And back to the agenda here. All right. So With that, there are currently no public hearings on the meeting for this evening. We'll move forward to other business of the board, which was a continuation of our July 28th meeting. Discussion of public hearing procedure.
So this was the rules and regs document that we've been discussing back and forth. After the last meeting, we had two different documents at the last meeting. The first portion was the general rules and regs, and the second was this formal rules of order. I was asked to incorporate those into a single document. I also cleaned up some stuff on the document, the rules and regs that were originally drafted back in 2018, like removing references to the year 2018 and stuff like that. There's one other invention from whole cloth that I want to share screen for, so just give me 1 second. So this section 14, peer review and outside consultant. This is actually one of the more, I did some research in between our previous meeting and this meeting, and this is actually one of the most important things that a board's rules and regs can address. This, only by passing a set of rules can a board or committee ask an applicant can a board or committee obtain an outside consultant to peer review an application that's come before the board. So what does this mean? If we disbelieved, say, the animal hospital's report on its traffic and we wanted to get a peer review, we would need to have this program set out in our rules and regs that would give the applicant a knowledge of what legal rights they have to appeal, how they would expect to be billed, et cetera, et cetera. Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 53G demands that we have this little excerpt that you see here, which I've copied more or less verbatim from the Planning Board's rules and regs, where it has existed and been utilized as recently as 2021. This is not something that I expect will be frequently used. It's pretty controversial when it's used because it's asking the applicant to pick up additional costs. And I'll be frank, usually for peer reviews, even where we disagree with an applicant's representation, it's usually the case that if they are presenting data that looks misleading to us, they are presenting it in that it is believable enough that another peer reviewer might not necessarily say these books are totally cooked. You know what I mean? Great example was I worked in Holyoke during the site plan approval for the Dunkin' Donuts that's on the corner of Hampton and Pleasant. They did get a peer review for that. The peer reviewer came back and said, these traffic numbers are within the standard deviation of statistical variance that you would expect for the ITE traffic numbers. And the board said, okay, two of us still don't believe those, you know? And that's the board's absolute right, but I'm just going through all the details here. Long story short, I don't expect that Section 14 will be frequently used. Nothing about it compels the board to use it. But if we're ever in a position where we doubt an application before us and we want recourse to get an outside consultant to review the numbers and for the applicant to pay for that peer review, we need this section here.
Okay. Well, and then, so basically we're making ourselves more legal, for lack of a better term, but, we're making sure our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed to be able to do what we need to do should we need to do it. Okay. All right. So was there anything else that you wanted to comment on regarding the document, Curtis, my thought is either we start at the top of the document and go through page by page, and if anyone has any questions or concerns, we can kind of go from there. I have it in front of me here and kind of have a couple things. We've already addressed the vice chair situation. And that's, is there a requirement that every year we vote officers? It does say that.
There actually is, and I was kind of putting off answering this question more formally until January rolled around. There is a requirement for an election come January.
Okay. That was my thought, but I just wanted to, I recall, I've been on the board for 10 plus years. I've been through a couple, so. Okay. All right. And then does anybody else have anything in section 2?
Okay, so we're going back. Sorry, we're going back up to
Yeah,
the top of the
let's go back
document.
and start at the beginning. I
Sounds
mean,
good.
it's, section 1 is kind of the obvious. That's a legal, we have to say who we are. Section 2 is the zoning board officers, which we've addressed. Do we have to technically vote you as the secretary, or is that a given, Curtis?
I think, let me demur on that one. I don't think I'm officially the secretary. I'm just staff. And even though I'm playing the role as secretary here, I think the way the ZBA functioned in the past is the vice president also is technically the secretary, even though I'm doing all the minutes and associated paperwork. I don't think I have any position on the board other than staff because I'm not a board member.
Correct.
So I'm not, so I am going to demur on that answer and I'll get back a better answer to you. And if this needs to be changed, I can submit a new edit to it.
Okay. I know that we have in the past had a secretary or stenographer, whatever you want to call it, to record the minutes for the meeting.
Right.
But I wasn't sure if that was a, for years, Barbara Lombard was doing
Yeah.
it and Jamie was doing it. We had somebody else for a little while.
Yeah, I think the distinction here is that I'm like a lowercase s secretary, but there's like an uppercase S appointed secretary on the board. Do you follow? Like I'm doing all
Yep.
the secretary stuff, but someone's like Secretary General Stalin somewhere,
Secretary of Record. Okay. All right. So let's find that out before we, make a decision.
do.
On it. Okay. Moving along. Meetings and agendas. I think it works pretty well how we have the agenda coming out of the planning department. It's a pretty straightforward agenda from month to month. And I guess the only thing that we should look at is, and I think you and I have touched base previously about the agenda, where we want people on the agenda, as to we think this is going to be a quick, easy one, rather than have them sit through 3 hours of somebody else to get a 5-minute approval. Let's get them up front and get them out of the way so we're not wasting their time.
Right.
So, and I think that seems to work. The other part I would say is, we need to, and I don't know whether we have it on the current agenda. Well, we don't on this one, but is there a reason, or should there be a reason, to have a time frame on the agenda, in that the administrative items are typically from 6 to 6:05. The first public hearing will be at 6:05. Yes, sir.
I have worked with boards that have done both timeframes and non-timeframes, and I tend to like non-timeframe. And the reason why is when we formally advertise, we have to advertise the item as it will appear on the agenda, which means that if we provide a timeframe, we're advertising the timeframe, which means that the timeframe for that advertised item, the item that'll show up for a public hearing in the newspaper ad and the abutter ad, is suddenly ironclad and cannot be moved around. That removes a little bit of flexibility on the board, and also removes the ability to be like, hey, this big public hearing is going to take up all evening. Let's put a bunch of things beforehand. It also leads to awkward situations where, hypothetically, you have someone who doesn't show up for another thing, or, you slate 15 minutes for your minutes to review and they take 2 minutes. And then you say, okay, well, we're obliged to wait for 10 minutes of dead air before we start our public hearing item.
I'm just, I know that there was a time where we did have timeframes on it, and I do remember sitting there having discussion amongst ourselves, saying, "Well, we can't start for another 3 minutes."
I can imagine a lot less pleasant company to have conversation with, and I'm content to do it either way. But I'm adding that 2 cents just from a programmatic perspective of what it would mean for us to impose timeframes, because there's a one weird trick that makes them legally binding under certain circumstances, and that's when you're advertising them via public hearing.
Nope. I'd rather keep it move these meetings along as quickly as possible.
Great.
We're all giving our time, and we should not be forced to give more. Okay. Anything else under meetings and agenda? Okay. Quorum and actions of the ZBA. Anyone have anything in that section? Section 4. Bueller. Okay. Moving on to section 5, the meetings.
Oh, I actually did have one. I'm so sorry. There is one thing in section 4 that I wanted to revisit.
Yes.
After I sent the draft to the board, the last paragraph of section 4, if a member of the ZBA is absent and an application would therefore require a unanimous vote for approval, the applicant may at their discretion choose to either postpone the hearing until a full board is present or withdraw their application without prejudice before any votes are taken and resubmitted at a later time. The one remark I want to say on this is the way I drafted it is actually inaccurate. They can request to withdraw their application, to postpone, but it ultimately, once an application reaches the board, it's the board's pleasure whether it's withdrawn or postponed or continued. And I would probably just tinker with that language to make sure it's clear to the applicant as well.
Okay. All right. So, meetings. Is everyone good with the current time frame of the start of this meeting?
Yeah.
I know we used to be at 6:30, then we moved to 6. Would anyone like it earlier? Would anyone like it later? Here's your chance to say when you'd like it. Yes, Steve.
I personally wouldn't mind it at 5, if that's possible, but I'm no longer working, so it's easier for me.
So,
I don't think I could do until 5:30 realistically,
okay.
but I could do 5:30 if that's what other people are agreeable to.
All right. Matt?
I prefer the current time. It just, I often work till 5:30, or by the time I get situated with whatever's happening at home and my wife and baby. So 6 is good for me.
Okay. Tony?
I don't care.
All right. Curtis?
Either one works fine for me.
Okay. Well, I have to tell you, I'm indifferent. So, but there's times where, if we know it's going to be a long meeting, do we have the flexibility to change it month to month based on the agenda?
Yes. The one thing we do not have the flexibility to do is to put it inside of the work day. And I don't know how the work day is defined. For instance, I don't know if we could actually start at 5 on the dot. I think we could. I don't think we can start earlier than 5. But yes, we can schedule a meeting for any time that falls after the workday, whether or not it falls on our normally scheduled time. And we can amend an agenda that's already been issued to alter the time as long as we publicly post it and amend any public hearing notices that are associated with it. Go on.
And this might overlap into the next section a bit, but how about having a time limit to the meeting? So I know you made some good points, Curtis, about if there was these set times, but maybe there should be a time limit so that any matter, can only be discussed for a certain amount of time, and we don't schedule meetings with so many things that it would be a 2-hour meeting. That all meetings must end by 7:15 or whatever the agreed upon time might be.
I actually really like that idea, and it's for a similar reason. So, obviously I like it for the simple reason that I don't love long meetings, but I also like it because the position of staff is usually a fairly permissive one, and I won't deny applicants' requests if it's legal for them to make those requests. But that leads to an occasional problem where if a bunch of people say, I want to be scheduled for the same meeting, there's nothing in the rules that says I can't burden the board with a 3-hour meeting. You know what I mean?
Right.
So if the board says, we have a time limit of, 1 hour or no more than 3 public hearing items or something like that, I'm throwing out random numbers here, then it empowers me to say that to applicants and protect your guys' time if that's what you want.
So what you're saying is at the minimum, we could set a number of applicants who can appear before the board at a certain meeting?
Yeah, yes.
Say maybe just 3 applicants is a max, just for an example.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Okay.
And then what we would have to do is, we'd have to be conscious of that when we're continuing items and stuff like that.
Right.
I don't know a time where we would have 3 continuous items all at the same time, but we did in fact have 2 continued items at the same time, 105 Pleasant and the other item that I'm forgetting right now. And then a couple of new public hearing items that showed up at the same time, like a home occupation and accessory apartment. That was the other one. That was the accessory apartment application.
I can imagine that being frustrating for residents, though, if they are trying to get before the board and there's a backlog.
That is the concern. I absolutely agree.
Well, and I guess that then opens up the question of, would we rather have one long meeting a month, or would people be open to 2 shorter meetings so we have a little more reasonable meeting time and a chance to really get into what's going on, as opposed to trying to move things along because we know that we have 2 more items behind it?
I think on an as-needed basis, if there wasn't, all of a sudden you needed for extra meetings, but it seems like if, most meetings that we're all involved in usually have an endpoint, whether it's at work or some other type of meeting, there should be an endpoint. And then maybe on a week, month by month basis, you can kind of look, hey, we have 3 matters. We have a policy that no matter can take more than 20 minutes and all meetings must end by 7:30 at the latest. So now all of a sudden a 4th one comes up, we can either go down to 15 minutes each and then they have to be continued.
Yeah. I think 20 minutes per hearing is a tight time frame. Just historically speaking, I've seen simple things like chickens last 2 hours.
But is that good? I mean, maybe that there's too much back and forth. And I noticed in the next section, there's a lot of language about trying to, modify the flow and how these meetings function. I do have some problems with some of that, but I think that if those type of things are looked at, then we should probably look at having timers for anybody speaking at any time. And there should be some controls about who speaks and for how long at any point, so that applicants presenting know, hey, you have 2 minutes to make your first case, and then the board is going to respond for 5 minutes. You can respond to that, and then we either make a decision or continue it, so that we have a control as to how these things are functioning.
I feel like my only concern with that is that we just don't get all the information presented that we need it, with a time constraint. That's my only concern. But maybe if there's like some way that the chairperson can grant additional time if requested, something like that, maybe.
The information is typically sent out prior. And
that is true.
But there's always nuance that is conveyed during a public meeting that is not conveyed on paper.
Exactly.
And I will be the first to tell you that a Zoom public meeting is a whole lot different than an open forum public meeting. It's not unreasonable to have 20 people sitting in the audience where you wouldn't get 20 people sitting on a Zoom call. And those 20 people are all going to have something to say, or a mumble or a grumble. And that is, it's a public meeting. They need to have that right to speak. And that is something that, is obviously brought up in here, in that, the public should be given an opportunity to speak, and the abutters and things like that. It is obviously, it is at the end of the day our decision whether or not we approve something or not. But we, as the board, have to look at the how does it affect the neighborhood? And we have to give that opportunity to the public and the abutters to speak. And I can tell you, I look forward to going back to real meetings as much as I enjoy sitting in my living room. It would be nice to go back to real meetings. Steve?
One thing too, I could see if you have 3 different applicants with 3 different issues, no matter how hard you're going to try to structure the time, I could see the last applicant still being shortchanged of time. And if we have a 7:15 cutoff, in fairness, is it fair to that applicant? Because being the last man on the totem pole, he or she may not have enough time to go over what they want to go over.
Well, and then that is where we say, okay, our meeting is going to be over at this time. And I think that maybe the other thing we can do, and we've done this in the past, is we are going to give, we will give 1 hour to a new applicant, and if it's a continued hearing, they get 20 minutes to come back with what new information they have that they didn't have the first month. Do we go along something like that? But then if we say each applicant gets an hour, and I'm throwing these numbers out here.
Seems too long.
That's way too long.
Right.
Especially if you say, we look at it as, 3 applicants, that's a 3-hour meeting. No way. Yeah. And my thought is, all meetings should be over by 8:00 at the latest.
Yeah.
So why don't we give a try to starting at that point? I have no. I thought I had an idea here. I think the idea that I potentially have is that you start at the starting point, which is that the expectation of the Zoning Board of Appeals is that no meeting shall run more than 2 hours, i.e. from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., with the expectation that no presenter shall run over 45 minutes with a first approach with a new special permit, and no more than 20 minutes with continuances of that same special permit. Members of the public are asked to keep their public comment to a limit of, no more than 5 minutes, and to attempt not to repeat commentary provided by other members of the public, which is a controversial subject unto itself, and I'm just proposing it as another time-saving thing here. I can look into some time limited stuff that was set by other communities. I know when I worked at Holyoke's planning board just set a limit on how long they were going to run meetings, and then the board had to make motions to continue the meetings past that point. Mm-hmm. But that time limit was 4 hours. and we hit it a lot.
Wow.
So yeah. So that's, I warn you, the universe of timetables is a frightening one.
And your mind will be like mush by the end of the meeting.
Exactly.
We started bringing cookies.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to work on something and bring something back to the board that everybody can react to at the next meeting.
I like that, but I think we're all in pretty much agreement that a 2-hour maximum meeting is.
Yeah, 2 hours is enough.
2 hours is enough. I agree.
Yeah.
I think we can get it more like 7:30. All the meetings I've been to have ended much sooner than that. So
Right.
maybe we can narrow it down somewhat and say, hey, you have 15 minutes to present your initial case. Then the board might have some questions, and that could be another 15 minutes. And maybe there's an additional 10 minutes max if you need to, but just tighten it somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's what Curtis is going to work on preparing.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then it kind of does roll into the conduct of meeting portion. In that, what, how the meeting flows, for lack of a better term. And I
Yeah.
think that, you know, we've had some contentious meetings in the last few months. And something that we don't have in this forum, the Zoom forum, that you do have in an open forum, is the abutters questioning the applicants directly. And that gets really out of control really fast. And that is, you know, it is important that all questions be posed, or all comments from abutters be posed or addressed to the board. It is the board's decision whether or not to then turn around and question the applicant. And the applicant must answer the board. That is the only way it works, because the applicant is appealing to the board. They are not appealing to the public. We only ask the public's input so we can hear the public's input, but it's the applicant that is appealing to the board. Does that make sense to everybody?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think, Lindsay, have you been were you in a meeting in town hall?
I had one meeting.
Okay, I thought you did.
One meeting.
The meeting.
Yeah.
But Tony, you've experienced the abutters going after the neighbors, and it can be a little.
I mean, you know, it was contentious between the abutters and that pool hall. So I could see.
Well, but the fact that you didn't have them in the same room, actually made it a lot easier. We would have had to, you know, have them leave their pool cues outside. So, and Curtis, you do have the Zoom hand raise function, and you know, because I'm running Zoom off my iPad, I don't even know where that button would be if I wanted to push it. But I don't know how that all works. And I don't know if most people know how that works.
John, I have a problem with some of this language about that seems to really restrict the board members' ability to even speak at all. So you can't make any kind of comment without raising your hand or it's just going to really restrict. It's going to slow down the meeting to a great deal. And that's where, if you can't interrupt, and obviously there can be degrees of interruption and there can be arguments that get out of control, but that's also the chairperson's job to control and, you know, keep people in check. But I think a lot of this language is very restrictive on the speech of the board member, and it should be removed. And I do feel, Curtis, that the planning department does a great job. I know you are very thorough and you know, have a lot of experience, but it does feel to me that the planning department has a huge influence on this board and is really driving a lot of the action in the board, and especially with a lot of this language, how it just went from a memo of Curtis's, all of a sudden it's like it's almost as if it's ready to be stamped and approved. It just shows that the planning department has a huge influence. I think, Curtis, you talk about 90% of the time in the meeting as well, and it often feels like you're running the meeting and the board, and we're just kind of looking to you for guidance. I don't think it should be that way. And I think there's also potentially a conflict of interest to have Curtis as the secretary when the city itself is, you know, often being asked for all these, the appellants are asking permission for the city. We don't want the city planner, the one who's controlling the whole meeting. It seems a little bit problematic if the public really knew, you know, hey, you know, the planning department is running the show on this zoning board, and that's, you know, kind of how it feels to me.
I think that personally, and I understand exactly what you're saying, Matt. The use of the knowledge and the thorough of knowledge that the planning board or the planning commissions or planning department's members bring is what I try to use it for. And, you know, the legality portion, I think at the end of the day, it does come down to the more active the board members are, and I say active tentatively, more constructively active that the board members are, the less of a role I think Curtis will play in a meeting. So it's our responsibility to come prepared. It's our responsibility not to come in with a decision made prior to the meeting, but at least knowledge and understanding of what the applicant, of what we believe the applicant is trying to appeal for. It doesn't mean that we come in with our heels dug in. It just means that we come in having done our due diligence. And that is, I think, the best way to approach that. And I can tell you, there again, it's sometimes it's difficult in this format to get everybody. Hey, I see you kind of moving, but I don't know if you're moving your arms or whether you're just, reaching for your glass of water. I'm not sure what's going on. So the format of in the building is going to be a lot different than it is Zoom. And so, but I want to make sure that we don't also have a member that is ruling the roost. And I can also tell you, though I am chairperson, I do not feel that it is only my voice that should be heard in the movie. Steve.
This document here in front of all of us, to me, is a difficult document to put together because we're looking at it at two different aspects. We're looking at it as an in-person meeting, and we're looking at it as a Zoom meeting. And he's trying to touch base with both situations. My feeling is this is leaning more towards a Zoom meeting, and I think this is the path we're going to follow, at least for a short while. Then hopefully once this ends and we're then in person, hopefully we could revisit this again and then make the necessary changes for those in-person meetings. So I think he's trying to cover both the heads and tails of the coin on this one. And I actually got to give him credit.
Does it make sense to have a in-person meeting format and a Zoom meeting format, or does that then just get it more complicated?
Well, I think right now, I think it's leaning more towards a Zoom meeting. What we need to do during our Zoom presentation. I think it would be different if we were meeting in person. And I would agree that there probably would need to have some changes made. But the way we're going right now with our Zoom sessions, to me, at least this section does, it makes sense to me.
Yeah. Lindsay?
I agree with Steve, but I also feel like I couldn't possibly come up with the rules for the in-person meetings right now, since I've only attended one meeting in person. So I like the idea of adopting the rules and then revisiting them once we're back in person when that happens.
Okay. Tony?
Yeah, that sounds okay to me.
Okay. Matt, does that kind of, does it at least, we need a format?
We need a format, but do we need to have something in writing that says no board member can make any comment unless you have prior approval of the board chairperson? Any comment made without prior approval may not be preserved and should be disregarded. It's fine to say that members of the public should ask for permission to speak, but a board member, I can't imagine any other organization where a member of the board would be restricted from speaking at any time, interrupting and saying, hey, I want to make a motion. I'm a board member, and that's one of the rights of a board member is to speak. And so this is anti-speech. It's not about, of course we want decorum, and I agree with you, John. We, the board members, should be helping to maintain the decorum. But we don't want to have restrictive speech hardwired into our bylaws. I don't understand how that came about, other than it was Curtis's idea to come up with this.
So here, and Lindsay, I'll give you a second here. in a
No,
minute.
it's fine. You can go.
Curtis and I had a brief discussion about this probably a month ago or so when he started drafting these. And the answer I gave him was, it is easier to let the reins on the horse a little loose than to try to yank him back once the horse is out of the barn. And if we say, these are the rules, and we're going to play by these rules, if somebody starts getting off course, we have every right to call that person out. Does it mean that we're going to play that way all the time? No, but at least the rules are there. Everybody knows, hey, look, you should really raise your hand before you talk. Now, right now, we're having a conversation. I try to, work. I have, on my screen, I see Steve, Tony, Lindsay, and Matt. So that's kind of that's the batting order, for lack of a better term. But I also, it restricts one person from just powerhousing through and making their agenda known and be the only agenda. So it gives a level of decorum to a meeting. Any comments, thoughts from anyone?
I have some thoughts.
Go ahead, Don. Steve.
Well, again, I go back to me, this is meant for a Zoom meeting. When we're having a Zoom meeting, I personally don't find any issues with the restrictions placed there. To me, you can't have 2, 3, 4 people talking at once during a Zoom meeting. When you're in person, and I've had many in-person meetings, you have better control of that. But here, you can't control it as easily. So I think you do need to have some guidelines in presenting one's view, point of fact, what have you.
If anything, Zoom may teach us not to talk over each other.
I agree with you, Steve, but I think that this particular language is highly restrictive. And John, I don't agree with the idea that you should have these draconian rules in place so that that to me sounds not like the kind of, framework anybody wants to operate in, so that rubs me the wrong way.
Okay. Lindsay?
I just think that the rules will allow everyone to speak when it's appropriate and to preserve the flow of the meeting. It just because you need permission to speak doesn't mean you're not going to get the chance to speak. So I think that everyone, should be able to have their input with the rules in place on Zoom, and then we could see what happens in person.
I think it's been pretty clear that we're going to need to revisit these rules once we are back in person. And I can tell you, I am also not opposed to revisiting these rules in 2 months if we need to. If we find that there are issues or concerns with the way the meetings are flowing, I am always, let's build a better mousetrap. Let's figure out a way that if it's not working for you, I would rather you say, hey, can we try this instead? As opposed to be uncomfortable, unhappy, or to the extent of resigning from the board because you don't like the way it's run.
It's a lot harder to say, hey, can we try this instead if you have this hard-coded set of draconian rules rather than a board of mutual respect where the board members are united with how we're running the meetings. And we don't need this kind of framework to keep the board functioning properly. For the public, yes.
Okay. Lindsay?
I just have found a lack of respect in the last few meetings, particularly when motions are made. And that's why I think these rules are necessary.
Okay. So here is what I am proposing. We can all present our version of Section 6 to Curtis. And because they all have to go to one person and then Curtis can distribute them back out. And I will ask that Curtis distribute them back out anonymously. If people have certain words that they would like changed or modified, and then we can thereby come up with a system that I think will work amicably for everyone. Matt, I understand your concern about being limited to speak. I agree with you that the board should be allowed to speak when they want to speak. And this may have been the result of previous meetings that were not as open-minded and peaceful. Does that all sound good to everyone?
Yep.
Sure.
Okay. And by no way, I think that one thing we need to make sure is that this is a starting point. We need a starting point to be able to move to the next point. And if we find these don't work, any of these, we need to be able to say, hey, look, this isn't working, folks. You need to make sure that we're all doing it for the right reason.
I can send out the Word document, a Word document excerpt of Section 6, such that everybody could potentially use that language, or you can create your own document. Would anybody like a copy of a Word document of Section 6 to edit as they would like to desire?
Yes.
Can you give
Yes,
us a
please.
Word document of the whole thing?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
There you go.
So sorry.
Oh no, I was just feel like if people don't use track changes, we're gonna get like a lot of versions and things are gonna get very confusing. That's my only thing.
That's fair. It sounds like so what John said was accurate. It can't be. It has to go out to each member of the board and then come back to me and then be shared to all members of the board at the same time. So the way this has to work would be that everybody give me back their own copy of the rules and regs, and I would ask that you turn on track changes, just so that I know what you're changing from this and that other members of the board can see what you're changing from this as well. I will send out a draft copy of the rules and regs when I've made the amendments that we've already discussed for this evening. I think the only one we're absolutely making is clarifying the final paragraph of Section 4. And then everybody can take that document and edit it with track changes, and then we can all review them at the next meeting.
Great.
Sounds good. Okay, moving on to Section 7, the public hearing guidelines. Is there, well, it's pretty straightforward. I don't think much has changed in that whole purview from what we do.
One new thing. So this does not in any way need to be part of the rules. These rules do not create the power to do this, but I define a straw poll here. Mm-hmm. So members of the board, starting with Tony, not to put the blame on you, Tony, I'm just remembering how this whole conversation started. Began this conversation with a concern about how decisions were made in the past, with the sensation that the board felt like we were stringing along applicants who had no chance of approval. As a result, the board asked for a mechanism to try to move things along. And I landed on this straw poll, which has been utilized by other bodies. A straw poll is a non-binding vote. You basically call it like any other vote. So someone makes a motion, seconded, and then the chairperson says, this is a straw poll, your votes are non-binding, you don't have to vote the way you vote in the straw poll, but if this was to be a motion to approve today, how would people vote? And then the board signals how they would vote, and then you can discuss from there. Again, you don't need these rules and regs for these. This is a power you already have. You can do what you like on that regard, but I defined it here to be a tool for everybody to use.
Okay.
and we can get rid of it as we want as well. It's just, and as with all of these rules, in fact, everything here is responsive to the board. I have no agenda with these. I sincerely don't. And if you want to get rid of the straw poll or any other element of the rules, I'm perfectly content with that. No hurt feelings here.
I think the straw poll rule is helpful just to reiterate that it's not binding, and it just helps, in case anyone, I don't know, to avoid confusion.
And I do like it because we did discuss it last month, and I think it is a good way of getting the feel of the group with which direction we're going in. Do we need to spend more time on something when we're all in agreement one way or another?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the example we can all point to is the pool hall that we kept wanting to try to make it work, but at the end of the day, there was too many points that just we couldn't get past, and that a straw poll would have cut that a lot faster. So I like the idea of the straw poll giving us the opportunity to try to get a sense of what are folks in the room thinking. It also helps the it'll work well, I think. Well, we have to make sure that it is emphasized that this is a non-binding vote, and that should additional evidence or items be brought to our attention, the end decision may change, but this is where we are. This is where the ship is steering currently, and it gives the applicant an idea as well. So, other thoughts, Tony?
Nope, I'm fine with that.
Matt?
It seems okay to me.
Okay. All right. One thing I did have under this is the presentation just under what page? The top of page 5. The word while reserving the right to limit presentations which are uncivil or repetitive or which are not relevant to the matters under consideration by the ZBA. And I think that repetitive portion is definitely important, both for the abutters, and I think there were some times with some members that were repetitive, saying the same thing over and over again. So I want to make sure that we all agree that is not just abutters, but we have to watch that we don't say the same thing over and over again.
So this is Curtis again. I actually kind of disagree with that. I think board members can say repetitive things because that same repetitive fact can still be true to them, and they're not introducing new data to the board. So let's just say basically a board member is being asked at every meeting, are you thinking about approving this? And if your answer is still the same, no, I don't like the color of the building, then you're going to sound awful repetitive, but it's your absolute right to sound repetitive. The reason this language exists, and it's a controversial one because any item with free speech is this is sometimes projects can get bogged down in public controversy where members of the public all have the same complaint. I don't like the color of it. And it's everybody's right to say that, but sometimes everybody takes a very long time to say it. And sometimes the board is not bullied by it, but gets frustrated by the length of that. Sometimes you have the same person coming to each meeting and expressing the same feeling. And I had some board members concerned about that with regard to 105 Pleasant. If that's not a concern, I'd be happy to strike this. And I want to be upfront with those possibilities because it's entirely possible that the board says, no, I don't want to touch this. This is potentially controversial.
I can tell you when we had the 40B application for Parsons Street Village, it was very clear to the members of the public that they were welcome to speak, but if it was found that they were saying the same thing the last person in front of them just said, that they would be their microphone would be turned off. And I think that it is important that people understand. We'll listen to anybody, but very simply, you can say, I agree with everything everyone else has said, and I want to add this. But don't tell me everything that everybody else just said, because we've already heard it. And it gets very old very fast. Does that make sense to people?
Mhm.
Yep.
It makes sense to me, but my only concern is when there's multiple people, like say there's multiple abutters with the same concern, that the weight of the concern isn't lessened because we're not hearing from, all 10 abutters because they all have the same concern about noise, let's say, So I guess that's my only concern really, is that just because people have the same concern, their voice might not be taken into account.
But that's where John just mentioned that I have the same concerns as the
Yeah.
previous abutters. And in addition to, I also have this, traffic being one. So they're kind of encapsulating all that into those parentheses. And in addition to.
Yeah. And honestly, I have no problem if a member of the public wants to stand up and say, I have the same concerns.
That makes sense.
Rather than saying, I don't like this, I don't like, and they can go on for 3 minutes or whatever the time frame is that we give them. It just kind of condenses it. Yeah.
That makes sense. So I wonder if we can just maybe give some sort of like guidance, like if you have the same concerns, you can, say I agree or something. I don't know if it's as, make it a little more obvious to people maybe. I don't know if that makes any sense, but.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, add that on your edit to the document when we send it back to Curtis.
Yeah.
If you can come up with verbiage that makes sense on that. Okay. Continuing down. Halfway down that page, there is any ZBA member may move to close the public hearing when such member believes the ZBA has received all information necessary. Is that move or make a motion?
I think the two can be used interchangeably, but I can change it to make a motion.
Okay. I think of move as something once the vote has been taken, it is so moved, as opposed to a motion being made. But I don't know if that's just, Robert's Rules of Order vocabulary or something.
No, the vocabulary refers to the same thing. So a motion is made and the motion is carried. You move when the motion is voted on in an affirmative fashion, whether by quorum or majority.
Right.
So yeah, I see your point. Potentially confusing. I'll just bring it to move to make a motion.
Yeah.
I actually had the same question, but I think move works too, but make a motion is clearer.
Right.
Okay, carrying on, section 8 for motions.
Being lying if I said I knew what that opinion was. This is drafted from the planning board. It is it's standard language. It's you're voting to approve or to deny. You're not voting to not approve.
I believe my understanding is that all motions must be made to approve, and that if you do not want to approve, you vote no.
Right.
But you cannot make a motion to deny the application. That was always my understanding.
Right. Yeah, you're right.
All motions needed to be made to approve, and that at that point, even if the answer was going to be no all the way across and a unanimous vote of no, the motion still had to be made to approve.
Yes, I think that's actually right. My apologies.
Okay. And does everybody understand the philosophy there? It's that backwards voting thing. You get these stupid questions on the ballots, and voting yes really means that you're not in favor of it. It's So But a motion, when made, is always made in an affirmative manner. And if you do not approve, then you vote no. Okay. And when we have that situation, I will make sure I reiterate that so everyone, even the public, understands that portion. Okay. Following the close of the public hearing and rendering a decision as soon as possible, there's a time frame for which those decisions must be written. Is the appeal period in here as well? I did not see, there's a 20-day appeal period.
No, I'll add it. It's not just like everything else here. It's not generated by these rules and regs. These rules and regs are merely reflecting what is standard under the Massachusetts general law. But but by that token, I should absolutely include the appeals period.
Okay. And what the due diligence is of the applicant upon receipt of that.
Okay.
A lot of people don't understand that it is their responsibility to come town hall, pick that up, and take it to the registry of deeds.
Got it.
All right. And record keeping, we already briefly touched on that. But so this is if financial means allow. Yeah, I think we have a budget for a clerk.
I think I really will check in on this, but the way this is worded makes me think that the board has a member who is a secretary, and that secretary has delegated record keeping to whatever planning staff person is staffing the ZBA, in this case, me.
Okay.
That's my instinct. I'm going to check it with Jeff and Jamie and see that that's accurate or not.
All right. All right. And the deadline for filing is a standard. That's your department, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, and it's an unfortunately long one, and I apologize for that. If something's a special permit requirement, it requires advertisement 2 weeks in advance. And for us to advertise something 2 weeks in advance, we need it in the course of the previous week to get it to the newspaper.
Okay. And then the legal notifications, the fees and everything like that, there again, that's set by the city. And the application timelines.
Also, Massachusetts general law to the different kinds of permit. They are special permit variances and appeals.
Yep.
And comprehensive permits.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole separate rule set for comprehensive permits that was developed back in 2014 that I'm not touching here.
Okay. Good. Because that'll take up another 10 pages, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Do we have any comprehensive permits coming up?
Not that I know of. There's one person who's a comprehensive permit holder who's looking to amend their property. They would then have to come forward to the ZBA to amend that existing comprehensive permit. But your guess is as good as mine whether that actually happens.
Okay. And then the last section, section 14, which is what you added just so we have that, should we need it, per statute.
Yeah.
All right. The code of ethics, which is there again, is that city or state that's requiring that?
That's actually neither. This was a planning board relic. So apparently in the ancient past, the planning board had like major issues with members being essentially like saboteurs. And they needed some sort of grounds in order to say like, okay, we need to be able to remove members of the board. The code of conduct therefore just defines that we're expected to not like the issue was like a physical assault on the board, like when we're all in the same place.
Okay.
This is way before my time, obviously, but that promulgated the code of ethics and then that got added to these rules here. I'm neutral to their inclusion, obviously, they're pretty boilerplate, blah, blah, blah.
All right. Any members have any concern about the code of ethics?
Nope.
No.
Pretty reasonable. All right. We should all treat each other nicely. It's pretty straightforward. And amendment and revision. We can amend anytime by a majority. Which is good.
And there's no
Okay.
appeal period, so when it's filed with the clerk, it's instant. So it would be the day after you guys vote on it.
All right. That sounds good. All right, back to the agenda. Is there anything anyone didn't see on there that they would like added, or questions or concerns? And if that's the case, when Curtis sends them out, please feel free to add or mark it up. This was just a chance for us all to kind of discuss it. And if we want to discuss it further, I am okay with that. Anyone have anything else about to say to that? Me. We have a meeting currently scheduled for next Wednesday, October 27th at 6 p.m. The deadline for submission is October 20th. And new applications must be received by October 13th by noon. Curtis, do we have any applications so far?
Nothing yet.
Anything that you see in the crystal ball?
One comprehensive permit amendment, potentially, but I don't think that would be pulled together by October.
Okay. All right. Just on a sidebar, there is a duration of which a variance or special permit must be acted upon. Am I correct?
Yes, 2 years.
Okay. And is that it's 2 years to which a permit is then pulled, or is it 2 years to which activity must happen?
That's a good question, actually. 1 second. I think it actually may be in these rules and regs. 1 second. Yes. Well, if a substantial use of it is not commenced. Now, what does substantial use mean? I think it's you've started construction in a meaningful way and not just put up a signpost. However, I will get clarification on that.
Okay. I look at the hearing we had concerning hurry and scurry. Clock is ticking.
Oh, so the one thing about hurry and scurry, you guys, when did you hold that permit hearing? It was 2019, right?
It may have been early 2020 because I was there.
I think its timeline is artificially stretched by the tolling period imposed by COVID during 2020. So I think it gets 2 years, 6 months, basically.
Okay.
Because Maura Healey's office, the Attorney General, said, okay, we can't expect people to be working on stuff when the state's on lockdown. We can't expect boards to be moving on stuff when the state's on lockdown. So we were not obliged to take constructive action for like 90 days. And applicants were not obliged to make action towards special permits that were granted for 90 days. So I think they have a slightly extended timeline, but I think it's going to lapse anyway. I'll tell you from the planning board perspective, the hurry and scurry owners did in fact come mentioning a plan to us, and they're not going to get started on it until at least 2022. So I think it's going to expire by that point, regardless of tolling.
Okay. Well, we'll confront it again. All right. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to discuss this evening?
Only thing I'd like to say is in the 1 year that I've been as an associate member, I've never felt slighted in speaking. This is my first tenure with Zoom sessions. I've never had to do it before, so I had to learn along the way. But as I did, again, I never felt slighted. I always felt I had an opportunity to speak. And part of it is also working with a great group. So I wanted to thank you for that.
Well, Steve, we appreciate your insight and your thoughtfulness. It has been, it's enjoyable to have you on the board.
Thank you, sir.
All right. And Yeah. It will be good when we can all actually see each other in person.
Mm,
I can't tell. If I couldn't tell if Tony agreed or not.
Probably watching the Red Sox game and they just gave up a hit.
boy,
All right. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay. A second from someone.
Second.
All right. And all in favor?
Aye.
Right.
Aye. All right. We will see you in a month.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Night.